welcome back to Introduction to XPage's Development, a video blog series at pauldn.com. Part 5, Creating and Editing Domino Documents. This blog series is based on Introduction to XPage's Development, a free course available from tlcc.com. In this Part 5 in the series, I'll be focusing on this lesson, Creating and Editing Domino Documents using Core Controls. Let's review the design of our customer XPages as we left them in the last part in this series. So we're developing our XPages here in the Design NSF application. So we've got the customer document and customer view. This was a throwaway XPage that we created first. We also have related resources like the My Styles style sheets. So our customer document XPage, if we take a look at the data source, there is a document1 data source on that XPage. So if I go to the XPage, on the Data tab, we have a document1 data source, and it is to another application, that customer's application, and specifically using the customer form. The data source name is document1, and when I select each one of these input controls, like the customer input control, I can see that on the Data tab, using simple data binding, it's bound to the customer field in the document1 data source. For contact, let's try that again. Bound to the contact field in the document1 data source, and so on. Also on here, there is a submit button, submit type button, and a return to view button. And that's a regular button type button. And for button type buttons, you do need to code the event, what that button's going to do when clicked. So its on-click event is using this simple action, open page, to open that customer by name view XPage, that other XPage. The submit button doesn't have anything coded in the on-click event, but if we look at the properties for the XPage, we see this property controls the navigation when a submit or cancel button is clicked. So on a successful submit where all validation passes, or when the user clicks a cancel type button, return to that customer by name view XPage. Here on the Customer by Name View XPage, we have a View Panel control. And when I select that, I can see that on the Data tab, it is bound to the Customer by Name view in that customer's application. And this column here, the Customer column, has this property set, show values in this column as links and open in read-only mode. And also, in the View Panel properties, right on the View tab, at runtime, open selected document using and specifying that other XPage, the customer document XPage, to open. So when I preview this, I do have the complete read capability, so I can page through my various customer documents. I can use the pagers at the top or the bottom. I can open up this Dusty Road Golf customer document by just clicking on that link. There's a return to view button, so I can click on that to return to view, open up another one. Don't see that submit button because we coded the visible/rendered property to only show the submit button when the document is in edit mode and only show this return to view when the document is in read mode. So that's the status of where we got to last time. So the first thing I'd like to do is provide a control to create a new customer document. And a good place to do that would be up here, right above my customer by name view XPage at the top here. So let's do that first. So here in Designer, on my customer by view XPage, just going to select to the left of that view panel control and create a break, and then add in a button control. And the button type, can leave that as a button type button, and in the events, going to again use a simple action and it's the open page simple action, and I want to specify that other XPage, the customer document XPage, to open that to create a new customer document. And OK. Should provide a more appropriate label as opposed to the default label. So maybe create new customer. Let's try that out. And that's what we're seeing here. So we're seeing a create new customer document. And when I click on that, my document opens in edit mode. And I'm creating, so I can enter in some information here. I'm going to have to do something about these selection controls. We'll get to that in a moment. But at this point in time, I am able to create a new customer document using the customer document XPage. I should provide a cancel button here. So provide that opportunity to cancel that change as opposed to hitting this back button. So let's work on that. So here in my customer document XPage, I'm going to add a cancel button next to my submit button. Give it the label cancel, and the button type is a cancel type button, and that's it. No need to code the event. In my XPage properties, I already have this set. Next page, on a successful submit or cancel, go to the customer by name view. So that's it for my cancel button. Now, also want to open up the existing documents in edit mode. So I'm going to provide a button to also open my documents in edit mode, provide a label like edit. It's a button type button, and again, using a simple action, and this is a document type simple action, and there are document type simple actions like save the document, modify a field. I want this one, change the mode, and change it to edit mode, and that's it. So we can create that. So when this edit button is clicked, this simple action to change the mode to edit mode will be executed. So this one here, I only want to reveal when the document is in read mode. And if I look at the properties for this return to view, this visible/rendered property was computed. And I'll just copy that into my clipboard. So if not, document 1 is editable, return true to show it as visible, otherwise false. And I will paste that into the visible/rendered property for my new edit button. Okay, so when it's not editable, I do want to show it as visible. Now, for my cancel button, it would have the same visible calculation as our submit button. Okay, so when the document is editable, yes, I do want to show that cancel button. But now that I think about it, that cancel button and that return to view button are a little bit redundant here. They're doing the same thing. So I can actually simply delete or replace this return to view button with my cancel button. Let me delete that. And just provide a more appropriate label like cancel or return to view so that its functionality is valid under both conditions, where the document is in read mode or in edit mode, and there's no need to code this visible property. Okay, so if I'm happy with that, I can go ahead and preview and test that, but I'm thinking about this cancel/return to view. Hang on, I have a little diamond here next to my label property. So all of these diamonds, basically I can compute any property except for the name or the ID of a control. So I can compute the label property for this cancel button. So I don't want to show it as visible or not visible, render it or not render it under certain conditions. I want a different label under certain conditions. So let me compute that. And I still have in my clipboard. So @if, let's go with the positive, when document 1 is editable, to this label property, I want to return this string, cancel. Otherwise, if it's not editable, return to view. And let's say OK. So my cancel button no longer has a static label. It has a computed label. It's visible under all conditions, but the label is going to change based on whether or not it's in read or in edit mode. So let me preview, save, compile that change. And I can see that the cancel button is cancel when in edit mode. If I open up an existing document, it is return to view when in read mode. I also have this edit button, so I can edit. No longer seeing return to view. Now I'm seeing cancel here from my cancel button. And I can make some changes and then submit those changes. For now, I'm just going to cancel that and then start addressing the second part of my problem. And for the selection controls, providing some appropriate selections. The next few slides are on the selection type controls, like the list box and the combo box controls, and there are others as well. So you'll find these in the core controls area of your controls palette, and like your other controls, you simply drag and drop them onto your XPage where you want that control. Besides the interface, a main distinction between these controls is the combo box will only accept a single selection, a single value, whereas with the list box you can check off the option to allow multiple selections. The selection items are added on the Values tab. One option is to add them in one at a time, and there is the option, like in Form Design, to provide label and value pairs. Another option is to copy these selection items from the field properties on the form, and then paste them into the Import List dialog for the control. And a third approach is to add a formula to return the selection items to a selection type control. When you take this approach, you're not actually coding in the formula language, you're coding in server-side JavaScript. But one of the libraries that is available to you that's been ported for you is the @functions library. And there you'll find your familiar @functions like @dbcolumn. And you can use that to return the selection items for a particular control. Some considerations when using the ported @functions. First off, you are coding in JavaScript, so your JavaScript rules and your JavaScript syntax apply. So when you're separating parameters, you use commas in JavaScript, not semicolons. Also, JavaScript is case sensitive, so @dbcolumn all lowercase would not work. So you have to be careful of that, but don't worry, Designer will remind you of that one. And the last one is the database parameter for your DB columns and your DB lookups. So you can either use @dbName or an empty string to indicate the current database, or you can pass a 2-element array indicating the server and the DB path. Another useful selection control is the radio button group control, and like your other selection controls, you add the selection item on the Values tab. And there's also a multi-selection checkbox group control. And like your other controls, you would add these from the controls palette onto your XPage. You'd set some of the basic properties, like the layout can be horizontal or vertical, bind it to the appropriate field in your data source, and then add the selection item on the Values tab. This tip suggests that you customize your controls palette and remove the legacy checkbox and radio button controls. These controls, you had to add one of these controls for each selection item, and then you had to group them or bind them together. So they're replaced, I think it was around 852 time frame, with the radio button group and the checkbox group controls. Much better. All of that grouping is done for you. You can add multiple selection items. So these are the ones you want to use. It is recommended that you customize your controls palette and remove the other two. So turning to Designer here on my customer document XPage, I'm going to start with a couple of these selection type controls, like other products where they can specify golf clubs and, golf balls and tees and so on, and this status field where they specify the status of the current customer. So looking at the data source, which is this customer form in our customers application, and looking at the design of those fields on the form, I can see that the other products field is a checkbox type field with this set of choices, one per line: golf balls, clothing, and so on. And I'm going to select all of those because I'm just going to copy them onto my XPage. So copy them from the form, and on my XPage, for that other products control, going to the Values tab, and I could add in items one at a time, like golf balls and so on. That takes time. So we'll just remove that. What I'm going to do is push this button here to import a list and paste in those values that I copied in. Okay, and there is no separator between the label and value, so just choosing no separator here. So one per line, and OK. And in my combo box control, oh, I think I wanted a checkbox control. Let's see what I get right now. So I'm going to preview that. And it is working as a selection control, but I missed on the interface. I really wanted checkbox. So back in the design, I'm going to, for this one, just go into the source. And with that selected in the source, my combo box control, and I can see all of the individual select items. This one with a label of golf balls, and of course, if there is no value, the label is used: golf balls, clothing, and so on. So if I did this right and added a checkbox group, not a checkbox, I'm going to change that right now as well. I'm going to customize my control palette. And in the core control section, I'm going to remove the checkbox and radio button. Do not want to use those old legacy 851 individual controls, because I don't want to add 7 of these and then bind them all together. Too much work. These are the ones I want to use. So I'll make that customization, and I can make other customization if I know I'm not going to use any of the iNotes controls for the application project I'm working on. I could just remove those, and so on. That's all for now. I'll just apply that, and OK, and I no longer have those old legacy checkbox and radio button controls. So I want a checkbox group control, and I'm going to just add it into my source after my combo box control. And all I really want here are the control tags. So these begin with XP checkbox group and end with XP checkbox group, as opposed to my XP combo box. So I'm just going to copy that and change my tag to change my control type. For the start and the end tag, I no longer need this, so I can just delete that. Of course, this is already bound to the correct other products field in my document 1 data source, so all of that is good. And if I preview that now, I see I'm getting the result that I wanted. Okay, so I get the checkbox interface for that particular control. So moving on to the status, going to once again go to the original data source, my customer form and my customer's application. Here's where my status field is defined. And this does have choices entered 1 per line, and they are in label value pairs. So I'm going to copy those. Okay, so new lead will have a stored value of 1, qualified lead a stored value of 2, and so on. So just copy those into my clipboard. And back on my XPage, for my status field. Now this one here, I do want to be a radio button, and I want this horizontal display for my radio button. So I'm going to do this a little differently. So this combo box control, if I look at the data binding, it's actually bound to the status field in my document 1 data source. So I'm going to add next to that what I really want as a radio button group control, and bind that to my document 1 data source, and specifically the status field within that. And then for my values, Once again, I'm going to import from a list and paste from the clipboard and indicate that I'm going to use this custom separator, the pipe or bar symbol, going to use that to distinguish or separate between my label and my value. Now the problem here is that there is actually for the value a space 1, and that would actually be stored, and that might mess up any other formulas that I have in my application. So unfortunately, I do have to manually remove all of these spaces. So let me do that. And that's done, so we'll say OK to that. I no longer need this combo box that was set up for the status field, so I'll just delete that. By default, I get this radio or this horizontal layout for my radio button controls. Choose horizontal or vertical. I do want the horizontal. And also, I'm going to specify a default value, and now my drop-down list actually shows me the values that are available. So I'll select a default value of new lead whenever a new customer document is created. So when we do that and say yes, compile it, preview it, that's what we're getting. So we're getting the default new lead, and we can select one of the radio button choices, multiple checkbox choices, and so on. Now for my region control, which is bound to the region field in my document one data source, and for my type control as well, there'll also be radio group controls. So I'll add those controls and bind them to the appropriate fields in the data source. But for these, for the values, I'm not going to hard code in the values. I'm not going to import from the form. Don't need the form anymore, so I'll just close that. What I'm going to do here in the customers application, there are some views that are useful. So we have a customer by region view and a customer by type view, which sorts and categorizes by type. So I'm going to perform a DB column, returning the first column of those respective views. So for my type control, I'm going to add a formula item. And actually, let me get the path to that customer's application first. So when I select my customer application, my navigator, I can see the complete file path, and I can just copy that to my clipboard. Now returning to my type control. And so with my type control selected, I'm going to add a formula item. And I'm going to perform a DB column, which takes a database as an array, server and complete file path. So let me just type that in. So for now, I'm just going to pass a variable DB name and then the view. So this is the type or the type field, so it's the customer by type view returning column 1. And then I'll set up that variable as an array. It's a JavaScript array with 2 arguments, null indicating the same server where this database, where this DB column is being performed, and then pasting in that path from my clipboard. Now, this might appear to work, but I do need to escape all of these backslashes to say, yes, treat that as a backslash within my string. Okay, and I want a similar formula for my region, so I'll just copy that entire formula. And then for the control that's bound to my region field, for its values, just going to paste in and select. select the correct view for that. Okay, let's test this out. So I'm going to preview, save, compile, and here's what I get. So I can now select for both the type and the region from the various radio button controls. Now for that last selection control, my state control, I also have a view available to me, but it's in my Workbench application. So if I open the views in my Workbench application, there is a US states view, and it has the abbreviation, 2-character state value in the first column and the full name in the second column. So I want to perform a pair of DB columns from this particular view. So first off, let me once again get the path to my Workbench application. And then for my state control that's bound to my state field, for its values, going to add a formula. Okay, so I've got my variable DB name as a 2-element array, pointing to the same server where this is running, and the path to my Workbench application, and performing a DB column to return from that server and database from the US states view column 2, and going to add to that the pipe symbol to create a label value pairing. Let me just copy that DB column and return column 1 as the actual value, so the abbreviation for the state. So let's try that out. And I now have the values of the second column as my selection items, but what will be stored is just the abbreviated version for the state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one of these, Acme Golf, and maybe a contact, Fred, and we'll go with Kentucky as the state, and we won't go with anything else. Well, maybe we'll select some of these. It's a new lead as well, some things that they're interested in. And I'll go ahead and submit that for Acme Golf. And it was submitted, and I can see it here in my customer by view name, XPage, but I don't see a value for city, and yeah, I do see contact and phone. So really certainly those 3 fields should be required fields. So that's the next step in what I need to do here. I need to provide some validation on those 4 fields: customer, city, contact, and phone. The next few slides provide an introduction to validation. The edit box control includes a validation tab, and there you'll find this required field setting, and when you check that off and the user attempts to submit a document without a value in this field, the result is a validation error. Now this is showing a non-descriptive validation error, value is required. There is also an option to provide a more descriptive error. To provide a more meaningful message, complete this area, required field error message, and the result is your more descriptive message is displayed within the alert. Client-side validation is the default setting, so by default, any validation error messages are displayed within an alert. There's also an option to enable server-side validation at the server or application or even at the control level. With server-side validation, there are 2 controls that you can use: the display error control add those next to your input controls to display a single validation error message for that control. And the other control is the display errors control. And with that, you get a summary of all of the validation errors in a single control. You can disable the default client validation at both the server and application level. To disable at the server level, edit the XSP properties file on the server and add the property XSP client validation equals false. At the application level, edit the application properties and on the page generation tab, change the client validation and check the value off. You can also disable client-side validation for a single control. To do that, in the All Properties for the control, locate the Disable Client-Side Validation property under the Data category and set its value to true. Turning to Designer here on my Customer Document XPage, I want to enable validation for this customer control and for several others. This is actually the Customer 1 control that's bound to the customer field in my Document 1 data source. And this edit box control has a validation tab, and I just check that off, required field, and probably want to provide a custom message like customer name required. And may as well spell that correctly. And for my contact, which is also displayed on my View XPage, contact required and city. And finally for phone. And let's test that out. So I'll start off by skipping all of those required fields. I'll set some of the selection fields and submit, and I see that customer name is required, so I'm alerted of that. Validation failed there, so I'll enter in a customer name and submit, and another validation error message. Okay, so I can enter in a contact name and submit, and yet another. And that is the nature of client-side validation. So for each validation failure, you're alerted. Certainly it's all happening on the client side, but one of the distinctions between client side and server side where we can get a summary of all validation in one round trip to the server. So I'll complete the rest of these required fields, some of these other fields as well. Phone is certainly a required field, so put a value in there. And now when I submit, my document is successfully submitted. So that's client-side validation. Let's switch to server-side validation. So I can do this on a control-by-control basis. So in the properties, I can locate under the Data tab, disable client-side validation and indicate that that is true. Okay, so I can do that for each of those required controls. If I wanted to do it on an application-wide basis, which is something I don't really recommend, but if I did, in the XSP properties under page generation, we're going to turn that off. So that's going to apply to every XPage and every control within this application. But just to keep it quick, I am going to go with that approach this time. And the result is my error messages for all of my controls that fail validation, for all of the values that fail validation, will be displayed in this error messages control. And this was added when I just checked off that I wanted to add this type of control. When I dragged over all of those fields from the Data tab, I had an option to check off that I wanted to add a submit button and error message, and that's those two controls. Now you can also add a display error type control. Typically, you add this next to the control that you want to display the error for. And then in this Show Error Messages For, select the appropriate control. And that's this one here, Customer 1. So with those changes, let's test out server-side validation. And I will submit this. And I can see my display error message up here and my display errors control summarizing all of the errors, in this case the validation required type errors that are present. So I need a phone number and a customer name and a city and so on. So with that new information, I can put in that information. So Bay West Golf Club is Louise. And I do need a city here as well. So let's go with California and San Jose. And submit. Well, let's leave just the one there. Let's not put in a city and submit. So I'm not seeing that display error there. Oh, I guess I missed the phone as well. So I still need a city and a phone. So San Jose and a phone. And now we'll try to submit that. And validation passed. And I can see this Bay West Golf Club that I just created. That concludes this part of the Introduction to XPage's development series. In this part, we took a look at the material in this lesson, creating and editing Domino documents using the core controls, and we also covered validation. There is an activity associated with this lesson, so I encourage you to try that out. In the next part, we're going to take a look at Module 3 and some advanced techniques using XPages. So until then, so long for now.